You are listening to Spiritual PTSD. I'm Damian Skinner, a recovering exorcist and Christian. The stories you are about to hear are all first-hand true life encounters I experienced as a child and later teen exorcist and miracle worker. As a tongue-talking, spirit-slaying, word and faith child minister, I personally performed well over 75 exorcisms before the age of 18. Many of these stories are horrific in nature, many hilarious, but all are embarrassing. This podcast is for adults only, as these stories are disturbing, and I do like to say the word fuck a lot. The year was 1989 or maybe 1990. I'm 14 years old and, well, we're at Six Flags. Our entire youth group would go to Six Flags every summer, typically a couple of times. But Six Flags in Dallas, actually Arlington, does something or used to do something that I thought was so cool. And they would have Christian family weekends, which means their little stadium concert area they would have bands in, like Petra, Newsboys, DC Talk, Audio Adrenaline, For Him, David and the Giants, DeGarmo and Key. And if you don't know the names of these bands, that's because you didn't grow up like I did. So we would go to Six Flags, and man, this was, you just got to remember when you're a teenager, everything is around who you're attracted to. In my case, girls. And so we had several girls in our youth group that I was just crazy over. They were older than me. I was the sweet, cute, younger guy that they would, kind of keep around like a pet, basically, which I loved. And, we finally have an entire day. We're not in the church. We're going to be out at Six Flags, and, you're walking around, you're getting, $14 drinks, and you're standing in line for 2 hours to do the shockwave, and, you see some of your friends here and there, and it's just fun, man. It was just those teenage years, and I always so respected our youth pastor, Sean, at the time, because he would always make sure that we had events and stuff like that to do. And so, here we are, 1990, I believe it was Newsboys that were headlining, and it had been a full day. Everyone's wearing their Christian shirts. Everybody is, really in a heightened Christian state, because, all of Six Flags is taken over by Christians, and we feel like we're really, making a stand by, writing an amusement park for Jesus. Why not? And so, it became incredibly disturbing, because most kids my age went to youth group but just didn't take it that serious, right? They were just kids. They were just teenagers, man. They would go, they would hear all this other stuff about, pleading the blood of Jesus or whatever, and they would just kind of ignore it because it was old people talking about it, right? That's how most kids were. They would go to youth group because there was some girl or some guy they like, or because their friend had invited them. Just most kids were just being kids. However, myself, I was fully radicalized, and so anywhere I went, there was really no such thing as fun. I felt like we were, not using our time. Surely people know that Jesus is coming back any second, and here we are, dicking around, walking around, Six Flags, and I was sincere about that. Like I really did struggle with that, and I wouldn't hang out with friends. I wouldn't do a lot of things because, I needed to be home studying the Word. I would be studying the Greek and the Hebrew original translations and stuff at, 13, 14, 15 years old. And you take a kid like that who's obviously a little bit off, and you put him in Six Flags to have fun, and you got all of these, like, hipster Christian bands, and this is when it was really becoming a big thing. And so, I always felt uncomfortable in fun Christian environments, because I felt like, honestly, we were kind of slacking. It was very hard to understand, when we're constantly talking about hell and demons and Jesus coming back and, saving the world. And then we're going to have a potluck, a pot blessing, because luck supposedly is short for Lucifer, in case you didn't know that. So, I would always be in a little bit of turmoil during these times. And we also didn't have money. So we were those kids that probably borrowed money, or we didn't borrow. The youth group paid for us to go most of the time. And then when we were there, we didn't even really have food money. And so it was always a little bit uncomfortable for us to go to these kind of things. And on this particular Six Flags trip, I walked out to go out to the van with a couple of people, and we were going to eat lunches and stuff that people had made, sandwiches and stuff like that. And I'm walking out, and there was an area outside of Six Flags, basically where everybody's coming in and going out, and where they take the tickets and all that. And I was sitting there or standing there waiting for the other kids to show up. And I start hearing this blood curdling scream. I mean, it's a guy's voice screaming to the top of his lungs. And I turn around, probably 15 feet, 17 feet away from me is this guy who, I got to be honest, right out the gate, anybody with any common sense would have looked at this young man and realized that he was handicapped. He was physically disabled. I can't tell you what he had because I was so young when I had this experience. But looking back on it, and after working with special ed kids and children with disabilities, I'm pretty sure he was severely Down syndrome, and I didn't know that. And I had been raised to believe that mental retardation, all of these kind of things, especially this was before there was an autism spectrum, so for us to understand, but any of those things were actually demonic. They were typically brought into the family through generational curses, which means that there's someone to blame, which means the family members that are living within that belief system are carrying some form of responsibility and guilt for basically the way the chromosomes and the DNA worked out. It's very tragic. It's something that I talk about from time to time, are the parents who live under so much guilt over children born with deformities, abnormalities, disabilities, but also the parents who are already experienced the worst tragedy in life of a kid committing suicide. And in most churches, even to this day, that is taught that those kids will go to hell. So parents live under so much guilt and depression that comes from this, and I find it endlessly ironic that while everything is the devil trying to attack and oppress, it is the belief system that is doing the oppression. It is the belief that that we have to walk this fine line. It's this belief that there's the cosmic cop that's waiting to beat your ass when you mess up. Now, if you're one of the cooler Christians, you're like, hey, it's grace and it's free and it's there for everybody. But it's still based off of the fact that you were born screwed up, born into sin, and that somebody had to come and be murdered on your behalf. We don't really talk about it in that light, but that is the undertow that most people are absorbing from that sort of teaching year over year. And so, at any rate, I'm standing here. I had just come out of, one of the earlier bands because they would perform all day. Everyone's really amped up. That's something that you'll notice. A lot of these embarrassing stories that I tell happen when I allowed myself as a kid to really engage into the madness of a crowd. The hysterics and everybody whooping and working each other up. And I was certainly at a heightened state at this point. And so, as embarrassing and painful it is to tell this story, I began to pray for this guy, and not pray for him for peace, not pray for him to calm down, not pray for him to anything. I began casting out the demon that was in him that was obviously there. He looked very different, so there must be a demon. And he was screaming and he was yelling. And guys, I got to tell you, I mean, as it went on, it was really creepy because this young man made eye contact with me. And when he made eye contact with me, the story I later told everyone at church was that I could see the demon in him. that the demon was actually looking at me like, get away from her, kind of thing. This poor guy had Down syndrome, guys. And, I have my hand stretched out. I'm standing in the middle of hundreds of people coming and going, moving back and forth. And I've got both hands out and I'm praying pretty loud, not to the top of my lungs, but pretty loud. And I'm casting out demons, or I'm rebuking the devil in this guy. And there was nobody around him. I don't know what had happened. That was part of what was so strange about it. Was later I found out that the youth group was basically right up around the corner, and he had wandered off. He was also older than most kids in youth group, which was really common back then. If you had a mental disability or a physical disability or whatever, a lot of times they would have you stay back in youth group even after you graduated from high school. All very inappropriate way to handle all of this. So I'm standing there, I'm praying, and this is the thing that I wanted to talk about. This went on my entire life, and that is, you could be out and about, enjoying your day, minding your own business, and somebody would walk by with something like a Marilyn Manson t-shirt, or somebody would walk by with an earring or a tattoo. Again, you got to remember, this was late 80s, early 90s. This is before everybody and their dog was covered in ink and piercings, which I prefer. But, I cannot communicate well enough the constant guilt that young believers live under, in the sense of, now that can be young in age or young in how long they've been indoctrinated. But we walk around with a constant feeling that we have to do something in public in front of people. Because if you don't, you're ashamed of the gospel. And, one of the most quoted scriptures, like Romans 1 something, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. First the Jews, then the Gentile. Well, we always just kind of threw out the Jew-Gentile part, right? Only the old folks even bothered to talk about that. But we understood was we could not be ashamed of the gospel, because that gospel, which that gospel in this case means that Jesus died for you and you need to accept him and turn away from basically your entire life, that was the essence of our existence. Okay, our existence was not to be married and have children. Our existence was not to do good in the world. Our existence was definitely not to make money, definitely not anything to do with your body, and that doesn't mean that there weren't people in my church that didn't have a better grasp on life and handle those other areas. But in my world, I was here for one reason, and that was to save people from going to hell. And every person that went to hell that I did not reach out to, I was going to be accountable for. I would stand before God, before the Bema seat, it's in the Bible, on the day of judgment, and I would have to give an account for every time I decided not to go up to a complete stranger and tell them that Jesus loves them, or pray for them, or cast out a demon, or any of those other things. And so this became an ongoing anxiety in my life that I honestly believe is a major part of why I've always been such a recluse once I became an adult. Anybody that knows me, anybody that has known me for any stretch of time will tell you that I have to try really hard not to just cancel plans. To this day, I can make plans, be excited about it, and no one understands. Not my wife, no one really understands, other than people with PTSD. But as the day comes for me to go do that thing, I slowly start becoming really uncomfortable, and I really start looking for reasons to not make that event. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a vacation. I could be going to Jamaica. I could be going to Germany. I could be going to see my favorite band. I could be going to, have the most amazing experience in my life. It doesn't matter. When I was shooting films and directing films, I dealt with the same thing. And there's very few things that I love to do more than that. And I really have come to believe that living in a way that no matter where you go, God's going to use you. And all of a sudden, he's going to be like, hey, go talk to that girl with those huge boobs and tell her that, Jesus loves you. the wrestling with that, the sitting around feeling guilty if you didn't do it, and then having to ask for forgiveness and having to pray, and then further trying to make up for that, so that you become these obnoxious, weird people that'll just like walk up to a table, interrupt their dinner, and start talking to them about the Lord. That's a big part of how I became so radicalized, is I didn't want to deal with the guilt of missing a soul, and I didn't want to deal with the anxiety. Again, anyone that knows me is the fastest way I deal with anxiety is I just rip the Band-Aid and I get it done. That's why waiting for an event drives me absolutely crazy. So, or it used to. It's not as bad once I made meditation a permanent part of my, my day. But back to the point. Now I'm standing here, and I want the average listener, to understand that it was a combination of obligation, a combination of fear, and a combination of, Jesus, I really hope no one sees this, right? Like, I wasn't trying to get people to see me. I was sincerely believing that this man had a demon, and that it was my job to remove that demon, and that he would stand upright and be healed like the miracles you saw in the Bible. I mean, Jesus said himself, these things I do, you'll do, and you'll do even greater things than this. Well, what could be greater than healing this poor guy outside of Six Flags, for fuck's sake, right? So, I make so many jokes about this that people forget that I sincerely thought I was helping that guy. The same way if you saw the exact same guy fall down, you would be compelled to go over there and help him up, try to do anything you can. It was coming from that same kind of a place. But to have the balls to do something like this in public, and it was because we were judging ourselves against all of the heroic stories in the Bible of Jesus and Paul, and, pick up your bed and walk, and Jesus spits in this mud, in the dirt, and makes mud and puts mud pies on this guy's eyes, and the guy can see, and all these things that, for me, it obviously those are stories, those are parables, those are analogies, they are psychological stories that we're supposed to derive meaning from. But I was raised where everything in the Bible is completely literal. And so, I stood there for probably, I don't know how long. It felt like 15, 20 minutes, using every trick that I had learned, growing up, my parents being exorcists and myself, exorcising demons. Of course, like I always say, surprise, nothing changed. But I will say this, and this is what creeped me out. The guy turned around and made eye contact with me, and he kept glaring at me, probably because I was standing there like Magneto, with my arms held out. Everyone's wondering where the superpowers were. And, but he did quiet down. And he did get quiet. And he just sat there. And he crossed his legs as best as he could. I remember that. And he just stared at me. And I stood there in the middle, outside of Six Flags, with people, coming and going, and kids and vans and buses full of youth groups. And I stood there with both my hands out like Moses, praying for this guy. And I believe that he found comfort from it. I don't believe I quieted a demon. I don't believe any of those things happened. I believe that he actually found comfort from somebody just praying for him. And when I stopped praying in tongues and casting out demons, and I just started praying for him probably the way I should have been anyway, which was, God love him, help him, give him peace, he just quieted down, and he just sat there and looked at me until someone from his youth group came over and got him. And they were clearly worried. They had lost him. They never made eye contact with me or anything, but I saw where they went, and it was just a group right around the corner. But, that was an early experience for me that served to basically prove that there was power in what I was doing. I didn't walk away from that going, you know what? He's disabled, and I think he found peace in me just kind of being quiet and looking at him and praying for him and being connected with him. Oh, no. I had cast a demon out, and even though I hadn't seen a physical healing, which is the way we used to put it, there had clearly been a heart healing, and I believe that guy was going to be completely physically restored within the next few days. That night, we're back in Six Flags, Newsboys, center stage, summertime, nighttime. It's that awesome breeze. It's that awesome memory. I'm staring at the girls that I'm crazy about. And I just remember thinking that I had really 100% healed that guy and feeling so grateful. I didn't think I was some hot shit. I really didn't. I remember feeling so grateful that I felt like I had the answer. I felt like I had the ability to physically heal someone's body. And that encouraged me for years and years. And many of the stories that you hear that happened, this was before I started Frontline. This was before I was in the ministry officially. So all of those stories, this was one of those things that really catapulted me more into more of a radical, take bigger risk, get louder, get in people's faces. You're saving them. They may not like it, but man, you're doing the right thing. I mean, even if that right thing sounds so ridiculous, it is still something that I believe that I was one of those rare people on this planet that was meant to do as much good as possible in the name of Jesus. And the only thing that I had to do was be courageous, brave, and basically take social risks. And since it was the right thing, any form of peer pressure, any form of typical social ideas of how you're supposed to interact with people, especially if they are disabled, all of that went out the window. And from this point forward, I really became radicalized and lived in a constant sense of turmoil over whether or not I wanted to be a regular everyday kid and enjoy life, or if I wanted to be this militant child of God that was going to save the world. And keep in mind, at this point, I had already discovered that I had several significant learning disabilities, even though they were misdiagnosed. I just knew that I didn't really fit in with the normal crowd. I was raised without any real form of money. I was always wearing, clothes that were too small, I had the learning disability factor. I had all of these social things that I already felt like the chances of me just being a normal kid were honestly pretty fucking shot. So looking back on it now as a grown man, if it was my children doing this, I would see it as they really saw this as an opportunity to be something significant. Yes, I wanted friends. Yes, I wanted to matter. Yes, I wanted to have a tribe and a group. But I also, more than anything, and it still exists in me to this day, I wanted to make an impact, a true, genuine impact. And because I was raised in this bizarre echo chamber, the only way to do that was by being emboldened and brave and going after and just literally removing demons from this planet and introducing people to the love of God and saving them from hell, and it turned into a very long, painful process that continued through my entire teen years and into my early 20s. Love this episode of Spiritual PTSD Podcast? Head over to iTunes, Spotify, or Google to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's really helpful this early on in our podcast journey. And of course, don't forget to check out our website, spiritualptsd.com, for full interviews, event updates, and to join the conversation. Thank you. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and their guest. All facts and information has been stated as the host and their guest experience them and should not serve as a historical portrayal.